You take one breath and your whole body agrees. This is the best air you have ever breathed. Your head clears, your muscles wake up. Somewhere underneath thought, an old animal part of you says the same word over and over, stay. Hold on to that feeling, because that feeling is the problem. Everything you have ever been told says more oxygen is better. It's what climbers gasp for near the summit. It's what hospitals pipe into the sick. So a world with half again as much of it should feel like paradise. For about 90 seconds, it does. Here's the readout every stop on this journey comes down to. Today, carbon dioxide, 420 parts per million, oxygen, 21%, average temperature, about 15 degrees. That is home. That is the air you were built for. Now the Carboniferous, 300 million years ago. Carbon dioxide, falling, temperature, a mild 20 degrees, and oxygen near 35%. The highest it has ever been in the entire history of the planet. Keep your eye on that last number. It is the one that feels like a gift. It is also the one that is aging you while you smile. So where exactly have you landed? You step forward and the ground gives slightly wet peat, black and waterlogged, the whole forest standing in shallow water. Above you, trunks rise like green pillars. These are lepidodendron, 30 meters tall, and they are not trees the way you know trees. They photosynthesize along their entire trunk, top to bottom, green all the way down. Giant ferns crowd every gap. The place doesn't just look alive, it smells alive in a way nothing in your century does. Why does one breath hit you like a drug? Because at 35%, every lungful carries roughly 2/3 more oxygen than the air you grew up on, and your blood takes it without asking. Your muscles fire harder, your mind sharpens. For a few minutes you are, in the most literal chemical sense, running on better fuel than any human who has ever lived. Enjoy it. It is the last thing this era does for you for free. So why doesn't the feeling last? Because the same physics that lifts you is already working against you. Robert Dudley, a biologist at Berkeley who has spent his career on how atmospheric oxygen shapes living bodies, puts the principle simply: oxygen moves by pressure. Push more of it into the air, and more of it drives into living tissue, whether that tissue asked for it or not. You feel the good side of that first, the clarity, the strength, then the other side arrives. Oxygen is a violently reactive gas. It is the thing that rusts iron and turns a cut apple brown, and inside you it does a quieter version of the same job every second you are alive. Your cells run on it, but it damages them as it goes, breaking off unstable fragments that fray your tissues and age you from the inside out. At 21%, your body spends enormous effort just holding that damage in check. Now the dial reads 35. What was a manageable background cost is suddenly running at close to double. The euphoria is real. It is also precisely the feeling of being oxidized faster than any human was ever built to survive. What happens when the oxygen stops being about you? Look down. Charcoal, threaded through the peat in black seams. Andrew Scott, a paleobotanist who reads the fossil record of fire, has traced these charcoal layers clear across the Carboniferous and found the same thing everywhere. This world burned constantly on a scale nothing since has ever matched. Here is the part that should frighten you. Normally, wet things don't burn. That is your intuition, and your intuition is calibrated to 21% oxygen. Above roughly 25%, the rule breaks. Waterlogged wood, living green fronds, an entire forest standing in a swamp. All of it becomes flammable. At 35%, a single bolt of lightning does not start a fire you could outrun or wait out. It starts a fire that rain cannot stop and wind only feeds, a fire that keeps going until there is simply nothing left to take. So the danger has changed shape. A moment ago, it was inside your cells. Now it is the entire landscape you are standing in, primed, soaked in oxygen, waiting for a spark that it gets somewhere every single day. But where is all this oxygen even coming from? This is where the era stops being a strange place to visit and becomes something far larger. The geologist Shannon Peters has described the deep Earth as a kind of planetary capacitor, a battery that charges across hundreds of millions of years by burying carbon and discharges when that carbon comes back. The 35% oxygen you are breathing is not a quirk of the weather. It is the reading on a battery mid-charge. Every one of these forests that grows, dies, and gets buried in the swamp instead of rotting away takes its carbon out of the sky and locks it in the ground. And here is the hinge. The oxygen those plants released stays behind in the air. Bury the carbon, keep the oxygen. Do that across 60 million years and an entire continent of swamps, and the number on the dial climbs to the highest it will ever reach. Which means the air is not just dangerous, it is evidence. Every euphoric, corrosive, flammable breath you take is the exhaust of the single largest carbon burial event in the planet's history, happening all around you right now in slow motion. You did not step into strange weather. You stepped into the middle of a machine that is quietly rebuilding the entire planet's chemistry, and it has no idea you were there. So what does it feel like to share a forest with a machine like that? You start noticing the animals. A dragonfly crosses the clearing with the wingspan of a hawk, 70 centimeters edge to edge. Something long and armored pushes through the ferns beside you, a millipede, Arthropleura, over 2 meters of it, a scorpion the size of a dog. None of them are monsters. They are the same small creatures you know, running on the same rule Dudley gave us. Insects have no lungs. They breathe through open tubes, and how big a body those tubes can supply depends entirely on how much oxygen is in the air. At 21%, they stay small. At 35, they can afford to be enormous. The air itself wrote the size of everything alive here, and it very nearly wrote an ending. For years, the story was that all this coal piled up because fungi had not yet evolved to rot dead wood. Kevin Boyce and colleagues took that apart in a study for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The fungi already existed, and if nothing had decayed, carbon dioxide would have crashed to zero and killed the forests outright. The real cause was tectonic. Colliding continents built sinking basins that drowned and buried the swamps again and again. How close did that come to catastrophe? Georg Fulner ran the numbers and found that pulling this much carbon out of the air under a fainter young sun brought the Earth to the very edge of freezing over entirely, a third global glaciation very nearly triggered by trees. The abundance around you, the giant wings, the armored bodies, the superhuman breath in your chest, all of it is the visible face of a planet that came within a hair of tipping into ice. So here is the truth of this place. The air will not kill you today. You could breathe it for hours. Out of every dangerous world in this series, this is the one your body can actually stand in, the most habitable of the deadly pasts. And that is exactly the trap. You feel magnificent, clear-headed, strong, certain you have found the best air on Earth. You cannot feel the oxidation working through your tissues. You cannot feel your own lifespan getting shorter with every superb breath. And you cannot see the spark that is, somewhere in this forest, already falling. The ground is fuel, the sky is an accelerant. Everything around you can burn, including the water, and you are standing in the middle of it feeling better than you have ever felt in your life when the fire comes. And it comes here more surely than anywhere you have ever been. There will be no rain heavy enough, no distance far enough, and no part of you that ever saw it coming. So why should any of this matter to you 300 million years later? Because these forests do exactly what you just watched over and over for 60 million years. They grow, they burn, they drown, they get buried, and they grow again. Every cycle, more carbon goes into the ground and stays there. Peat becomes rock. Rock becomes coal. That coal is the whole point. The carbon these swamps pulled out of the sky and locked underground did not vanish. It waited. It waited 300 million years through every era still ahead of you on this journey until the species you happen to belong to dug it up and set it alight. The oxygen that made you feel superhuman and the coal in the ground are the same event seen from two sides. The Carboniferous built the fuel. We are running the reaction in reverse, unburying the carbon breath by breath and handing it back to the sky it came from. The air here really was the best the world would ever hold. That was always the problem. It felt like a gift. It was a fuse 300 million years long, and we are the ones who finally lit the other end.